weapons are peace. No, Mr. Stoltenberg, weapons are not peace. Negotiations are peace. Shame on you for saying that weapons are peace. We're grown-ups. Talk like grown-ups. We want to stay alive. We don't want a nuclear war. We don't trust you. Because if you want trust, then talk to the other side. Understand politics. Understand, like Clausewitz knew 2 centuries ago, war is a continuation of politics with other means. It means that politics in the normal sense was not pursued properly, so that politics now is by killing people and destroying Ukraine. Politics is to separate the 2 superpowers, to stop the neoconservative illusion of a unipolar U.S. world. We don't want a hegemon, whether it's the U.S. or any other country. We want a multipolar world. We don't want a world of military alliances that's going to get us into World War III the same way that it got us into World War I, and we've never gotten out of that. Stop these divisions of the world between our side and your side, and talk with each other. And especially keep the military powers away from each other. Because the President of the United States should be the first to say NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine. We don't want these 2 superpowers accidentally or deliberately entering into complete Armageddon. Think of the United States, how it would be if Russia made military bases in Mexico. We'd say, oh, sure, no problem. That's Mexico's right. Hardly. We'd invade the next day. But the neocons don't have principles. They just have the idea of power. So, well, Russia's not going to do it. We're going to do it. But this is what is bringing us 90 seconds to midnight, for God's sake. So what do we need to do? We need for negotiations to start immediately. I don't know where most of Europe's leaders are. They just have their head completely in the sand, or the U.S. tells them what to do. There are a few that have spoken clearly and publicly, but then the U.S. beats them down. But President Macron has said repeatedly, stop this provocation, because we need to respect the security interests of Russia as well as Ukraine. Prime Minister Orban of Hungary has been very clear on this point. But most of the European leaders just follow the U.S. line. And so we don't hear from Europe, and Brussels even more so. It's just a war party. There's no diplomacy anymore. But for the rest of the world, and there are people all over the world listening in, please have your governments call for negotiations immediately. And the negotiations are not between Ukraine and Russia. This is a war between the United States and Russia. It's being fought by Ukrainians who are trapped in the middle of this disaster, by leaders who somehow were told by the United States, oh, be with us, we'll keep you safe, just like the U.S. kept the Vietnamese safe, just like the U.S. kept the Afghanis safe. Come on. This is time for honesty and being grown up. Ukraine is not being helped at all by this. Ukraine's being destroyed by this proxy war. But have your governments call for immediate negotiations between the United States and Russia to stop a war that is endangering the entire planet. And it's obvious The first term of an agreement is Russia goes home and the United States stops NATO enlargement. This is the basis of peace, that Ukraine is neutral, and both sides of these nuclear superpowers back off. Neither fills the vacuum of the other. Of course, there are specific issues inside that need now to be settled. We once had the Minsk II agreements, and they were aimed at settling peacefully the conflict in the Donbass. But we even heard from former Chancellor Merkel, oh, we didn't really mean that. We weren't really going to guarantee that. That was bad faith. That was to give Ukraine time to arm. She actually said that a couple of weeks ago. We had agreement for peace, but was it a fake by the US and Ukraine and Germany to rearm? Or was it real? We need something real this time, not something fake. And similarly with Crimea. What Yanukovych was proposing was a long-term lease arrangement for Russia and Ukraine in Crimea, because after all, Russia's had its naval fleet in Sevastopol since 1783. And then every day now Zelensky says, oh, we're going to chase them out of Crimea. Yeah, over all of our dead bodies. Let's stop this nonsense, this childishness. The whole world's survival is at stake. And this rhetoric is so reckless of these leaders, these so-called leaders, these politicians, who think that with bravado, that they can say anything, but what they're doing is driving us closer to nuclear war. So we need compromises like the Minsk agreement, like a long-term arrangement for Crimea, and especially for the two nuclear superpowers to back off and stop this reckless NATO enlargement, which was a lie from the beginning, a violation of agreements made to President Gorbachev all the way back in 1990, and hopelessly provocative and dangerous. And that is the key to getting a world back to some protection and some hope for survival. So thank you very much. We need your voices everywhere in every country for governments to stand up clearly at the United Nations and in every other forum to say, stop this war now, stop the escalation, stop the bravado, stop the hate talk, and sit down and negotiate a peace that respects the security interests of all of the parties, and stop the military expansion. This is the root of this war. Most of the world, and I should be more clear, most of the world's governments clearly want peace and are neutral in this conflict between the US and Russia. It's when this war, the war of 2022, exploded in February last year. The US and Europe said, okay, the whole world's aligned against Russian aggression. Well, actually, it wasn't like that. The vast majority of the world's governments said, stop the fighting. We don't take sides. We don't join your sanctions. We don't view this as a one-sided affair. China, for example, very responsibly said, negotiate, but respect the security interests of all sides. What that meant was the NATO question. And around the world, most governments did not impose sanctions on Russia. They said, we want an end to the war. We are neither Russia haters nor Ukraine haters. We want the two sides to negotiate. So practically speaking, China, Brazil, India, South Africa, the so-called BRICS countries, together with Russia. Those countries are major voices for peace and negotiation, and they should continue to say very clearly that their vision is not to side with one side or the other side, but to side with negotiation and peace. And India has a special role to play. Not only is it a great country and a civilization and 1.4 billion people, but it's the presidency of the G20 this year. And so India has plenty of opportunity to push hard for peace and negotiations. Brazil will host the G20 next year. President Lula is very clear that what is needed right now is not military victory on the battlefield. This is a reckless illusion. What is needed is negotiations and an end to the NATO enlargement. And Brazil will be president of the G20 next year. South Africa, which has said the same, will be president of the